There was a time when life moved with a kind of soft golden patience, a time when mornings drifted into being like the opening scene of a film, quiet and slow and full of the sounds that only the 1960s could make. If you lived through that decade in America, you remember it not as a distant memory, but as a heartbeat. You remember how the world felt when sunlight poured through thin kitchen curtains, illuminating wooden floors and patterned linoleum while the fragrance of fresh coffee floated gently through the air. You remember the clink of a spoon against a ceramic mug, the light rustle of the morning newspaper, and the soft hum of a radio perched on a shelf always playing something familiar, something warm, something that made the day feel full of possibility. The 1960s had a particular glow. It wasn't the glow of screens or digital distractions. It was the glow of real life unfolding moment by moment. It lived in the steady tick of a wall clock, in the soft buzz of a tube radio warming up, in the faint whistle of a kettle on the stove. Mothers moved about the kitchen in slippers and house dresses, packing school lunches into brown paper bags, cutting crusts from sandwiches, tying ribbons in young girls' hair. Fathers adjusted their ties in hallway mirrors, polished their shoes, and carried the weight of the world in the calm way they folded the morning paper. The rhythm of those early hours felt like a promise that the day ahead would be steady, familiar, and safe. Kids felt that safety too. You could walk outside barefoot onto a porch, still cool from the night, hear the song of a lone bird perched on a power line, and know the world was waking up with you. The neighborhood was a universe unto itself, a circle of houses with neatly kept lawns, white fences, trimmed hedges, and the quiet confidence that everyone knew everyone else. The mailman waved from across the street. A neighbor watered her front garden. A dog barked in the distance. Life felt stitched together by simple interactions, by the small kindnesses that defined American communities before everything became loud and fast. Walking to school was a ritual that carried its own kind of magic. You'd step off the porch with a lunchbox in one hand, books tucked under the other arm, and head down sidewalks lined with towering elm trees. Their branches formed long tunnels of shade that danced with patterns of light whenever the wind moved. You didn't need music in your ears or a glowing screen in your hand. The world itself was enough. The sound of bicycle tires rolling over gravel, the chatter of kids gathering at the corner, the echo of the crossing guard's whistle. These were the sounds that shaped childhood. Inside school, everything felt grounded. Desks were wooden, scratched with decades of initials carved by restless hands. Chalk dust floated through the air like soft snowfall as teachers wrote neatly across blackboards. The smell of fresh pencils, old books, and floor polish created an atmosphere that felt both ancient and alive. You learned by listening, by writing, by repeating. You memorized multiplication tables, recited poems, traced maps of the United States with steady hands. Knowledge wasn't instant. It was earned slowly, page by page, question by question, lesson by lesson. And when recess arrived, the world cracked open into pure freedom. You pushed through the heavy double doors and ran into the sunlight like it was waiting just for you. You played kickball on cracked pavement, jumped rope until your legs ached, chased friends across fields of dry grass. The playground was made of metal, wood, and imagination. Tall monkey bars that tested your courage, spinning merry-go-rounds that left you breathless, slides heating under the sun until you could feel their warmth through your clothes. You came back inside flushed, sweaty, alive. Childhood wasn't curated then. It was lived fully and without fear. Lunchtime brought the comforting rustle of wax paper, peanut butter sandwiches, bologna sandwiches, Apple's homemade cookies wrapped in napkins. You talked, laughed, traded snacks, told stories. You built friendships without apps, without selfies, without online status updates, just eye contact, shared jokes, and the sound of your own laughter echoing through the cafeteria. And maybe as these scenes unfold in your mind, slowly, gently, you feel that familiar tug in your chest, that soft ache of remembering a world where everything felt slower, warmer, and wonderfully simple. If this journey is awakening memories you haven't felt in years, consider subscribing for more stories like this. Because we're only beginning to step into the heart of the 1960s. Life in the 1960s had a rhythm that felt almost musical, a steady beat of everyday moments that blended into something warm, familiar, and deeply human. When you stepped outside in the afternoon, the world greeted you with sounds that seem almost mythical today. The hum of a lawnmower drifting through the air, the rhythmic click of a sprinkler turning in slow arcs across a green yard, the laughter of kids riding their bikes down the sidewalk, shouting to one another as their shadows stretched long across the pavement. These were more than sounds. They were the soundtrack of a decade defined by simplicity and presence. Every neighborhood felt like its own small world. You could stand on the curb, feel the sun warming the back of your neck, and look down a street lined with tidy houses, each one unique yet somehow part of a larger pattern. Cars with chrome bumpers and pastel paint jobs sat in driveways, laundry fluttered on clotheslines, dogs dozed in patches of sunlight. You could walk down the block and know exactly who lived where. The family with the friendly beagle, the older couple who always waved from their porch swinged, the kids who kept their baseball gloves on the front steps just in case someone wanted to play. It wasn't a collection of houses. It was a living, breathing community. The corner store was a universe of its own. Push open the wooden door and you'd hear a bell chime overhead, announcing your arrival. The air smelled of bubblegum, warm bread, and newspaper ink. Rows of candy in bright wrappers, Mary Janes, Tootsie Rolls, Jawbreakers, the size of golf balls, lined the counter. You could buy a Coke in a glass bottle for a handful of coins, or grab a comic book from a spinning rack and read it on the front steps before heading home. The shopkeeper knew your name. He knew your parents. He might ask how school was going or remind you not to forget your change. Interactions were personal, anchored in familiarity and genuine care. On hot summer days, the neighborhood came alive in a way that felt timeless. Kids ran through sprinklers, water sparkling in the sunlight as they shrieked with laughter. Someone might drag a radio out onto the porch, tuning into the local station as Motown classics filled the air. Ball games started in front yards with improvised bases made from old t-shirts and chalk lines drawn across driveways. You didn't need equipment, or permission, or schedules. You just needed time. And the 1960s gave you plenty of that. Inside the house, the afternoon held its own quiet charm. Mothers folded laundry while watching soap operas flicker on small black and white televisions. The scent of dinner began drifting through the air long before the sun set, pot roast simmering, onions sizzling in a pan, the unmistakable aroma of fresh rolls baking in the oven. You could hear the soft buzz of conversation through open windows, the clatter of dishes, the murmur of a passing car. Life unfolded slowly, one moment blending gently into the next. After school, kids dropped their books on the kitchen table and headed straight outside. Homework could wait. Daylight couldn't. You might hop on your bike and pedal down the block with friends, wind tugging at your shirt, the world passing in a blur of sunlight and color. Or you might wander to the nearest creek, stepping across cool stones, letting the water slip through your fingers as you watched minnows dart beneath the surface. There were forts to build out of scrap wood, tin cans to stack for target practice, and trees tall enough to make you feel like you could see the whole world from their branches. Technology existed, but it moved gently. The telephone hung on the wall in the kitchen, its coiled cord twisting and tangling no matter what you did. When it rang, everyone paused for a moment before someone hurried over to answer it. Conversations were brief and intentional, and if you weren't home, well, you'd find out who called when you got back. The world accepted that people couldn't be reached instantly. It was normal, it was healthy, it was life. The living room served as the heart of the home. Even in the afternoon, it felt like a sanctuary. Soft light filtering in through curtains, magazines scattered on coffee tables, radio humming gently in the background. Vinyl records leaned neatly beside the turntable, waiting to be played when evening came. Furniture had weight and warmth to it, wooden cabinets, patterned sofas, lamps with glowing shades that cast golden pools of light across quiet corners. Everything felt lived in, touched, familiar, and outside, the world continued its gentle symphony. Screen doors slammed, dogs barked, footsteps echoed on sidewalks. The scent of someone's backyard barbecue drifted across property lines. You might hear a baseball game playing faintly from a neighbor's transistor radio, the smooth cadence of the announcer calling each pitch with a calm authority that made you feel like you were right there in the stadium. These were the moments that defined ordinary days, small, simple, and yet endlessly rich. Moments that didn't ask for attention but carved themselves into memory through warmth, repetition, and presence. They belonged to everyone, yet felt personal to each person who lived them. And as you remember these scenes, the way the world looked, sounded, and felt, you might find yourself slipping back into that time without even realizing it. Because the 1960s weren't just lived, they were felt, deeply and quietly, in a way that still lingers in the corners of the heart. American culture in the 1960s carried a pulse that you could feel even if you didn't have the words to describe it. It was in the music, in the colors, in the clothes, in the way people gathered, talked, laughed, disagreed, and dreamed. It was a decade where the familiar world and the new world moved side by side, each shaping the other like two rivers merging quietly into one. If you lived through it, you remember how everything seemed to be changing, sometimes gently, sometimes suddenly, but always with a kind of electricity that made the air feel charged. Music was everywhere. It wasn't background noise, it was a living force. The radio wasn't just something you turned on, it was something you tuned into, waiting to hear what song would arrive next, like a message from the universe. You might hear the Beach Boys singing about sun-soaked California or Aretha Franklin belting out a truth that made you stand a little taller. You might hear Bob Dylan's voice, raw and prophetic, or Sam Cooke singing a hope so powerful it seemed to rise through the speakers like morning light. Music didn't just play, it shaped you. It told you who you were, who you could be, what the world might become. Record stores were temples of discovery. You'd walk inside and see rows of vinyl and cardboard sleeves, each one a doorway to another world. Teenagers gathered around listening stations, sharing headphones, talking about the latest album with excitement so pure it felt like a secret. Even the older generation, who grew up with swing and big bands, found themselves curious. The 1960s gave everyone something new, something to tap their foot to. something to love. And the fashion. It was bold, expressive, unapologetically alive. The early part of the decade held on to neat collars, tidy dresses, carefully combed hair. But as the years moved forward, color exploded like fireworks. Tie-dyes swirled like galaxies. Miniskirts appeared as if they had been waiting decades to exist. Bell-bottoms swayed with every step. People weren't afraid to be seen. They embraced it. Clothing became identity, expression, rebellion, joy. Even if you didn't dress boldly, you felt the shift. You knew the world was opening up. Social life thrived in places that don't exist the same way anymore. Roller rinks with flashing lights and polished floors where kids glided in circles, laughing as their wheels clicked beneath them. Drive-ins where families sat under the stars, windows rolled down, popcorn in hand, watching movies projected onto giant screens that glowed against the night. Bowling alleys filled with neon signs and the echo of pins crashing in perfect, satisfying rhythm. Diners with chrome stools and jukeboxes glowing in the corner, where teenagers sipped milkshakes and talked about everything and nothing all at once. And then there were the front porches, the heart of connection. People sat outside as the evening settled in, fireflies blinking across the yard like tiny lanterns. Neighbors stopped by without calling first. You talked about the weather, about the news, about your kids' report cards, about dreams, about worries. Conversations had texture, slow, unhurried, real. You weren't trying to fill silence. You were sharing it. There was a comfort in simply being near others, in knowing that friendships didn't need appointments or reminders. Even the grocery store felt different back then. You walked through aisles that smelled faintly of waxed floors and fresh produce. Packages had bright, simple designs. Prices felt steady. The cashier knew your name, and you knew hers. She asked about your family, and the conversation wasn't rushed. You carried your bags home, sometimes stopping to chat with someone along the way. No hurry, no noise, just life, unfolding in small, meaningful steps. But beneath all the everyday beauty, there was a deeper hum, a cultural shift happening across the nation. Young people were asking questions their parents never dared to ask. They were dreaming bigger, challenging the world more boldly, believing in justice, equality, peace. You could feel those conversations in classrooms, in living rooms, in coffee shops filled with cigarette smoke and quiet intensity. The society that had once seemed so steady was stretching, reaching, evolving. The old and the new collided and embraced all at once. Yet even with so much change, there remained a tenderness in the way people interacted. They helped one another. They trusted one another. An October bicycle might lead to 3 neighbors stepping outside to check on a child. A broken lawnmower meant someone would lend theirs without hesitation. A new baby meant casseroles delivered to your doorstep wrapped in towels to keep them warm. Life wasn't perfect, but it was connected. Evenings carried that connection into something almost sacred. You could hear a baseball game playing from a living room radio, the announcer's steady voice weaving comfort into the walls. You could see families gathered for dinner, the glow of table lamps casting warm halos across plates passed from hand to hand. The faint television glow flickered from windows as sitcom laughter spilled out softly into the night. Streets grew quiet. Crickets sang. The world slowed down enough for you to feel your own breath, your own thoughts, your own place in the universe. And as these memories fill your mind now, the colors, the music, the voices, the gentle chaos of a world before everything became instantaneous, maybe you feel the truth rising inside you. Some moments fade. They live quietly within us, waiting for us to return to them. Looking back now, it is almost impossible to explain to someone who didn't live through it why the 1960s feel so different, so warm, so deeply carved into memory. It wasn't just the music, the clothes, or the extraordinary moments that filled the headlines. It was the way the world seemed to hold its breath between each beat of daily life. There was time to notice things, time to feel things, time to be still without feeling like the world was passing you by. Even the quiet moments had weight. You could walk outside at dusk and feel the evening settling softly over everything, the sky shifting from gold to blue, porch lights flickering on one by one, a breeze carrying the faint scent of cut grass and charcoal from someone's backyard grill. Neighbors waved as they headed inside. Dogs barked softly from fenced yards. Fireflies hovered in the dark like tiny memories floating just out of reach. It was a world that asked nothing of you but your presence. Inside, the house glowed with a warmth that had nothing to do with electricity. Lamps cast small halos of light across wooden floors. The soft hum of a fan drifted down the hallway. Children brushed their teeth while humming songs they'd heard on the radio that afternoon. Parents settled into living room chairs, perhaps with a book, or a newspaper, or the soft murmur of the TV playing a familiar show. It wasn't about entertainment, it was about togetherness. The kind that happens quietly, naturally, without planning. You didn't need noise to fill the silence. You didn't need screens to feel connected. You didn't need constant updates to feel alive. Life felt whole just as it was. And maybe that's why the memories hit so deeply today. Because they remind us of a world where simplicity wasn't something we longed for. It was simply how things were. You weren't distracted by 1,000 voices. You weren't pulled in every direction. You weren't living in a constant rush. You had time to breathe, time to wander, time to let your mind drift toward dreams instead of notifications. But the beauty of the 1960s wasn't only found in the quiet moments. It was found in the way people believed in things, in the future, in their communities, in the possibility that tomorrow could be brighter than today. Even when the world felt uncertain, even when the decade carried its share of heartbreak and change, people still held on to hope. You could feel it in the way families gathered around the dinner table, in the laughter spilling out of open windows on warm summer nights, in the way children played outside until the streetlights came on, trusting the world around them to hold them gently. The 1960s taught us to wait, to savor, to pay attention, to appreciate, to belong, to hope. And those lessons didn't fade with the years, they stayed with us, tucked quietly into the corners of our minds, resurfacing whenever a certain song plays, or a familiar scent drifts by, or a photograph with soft edges falls into our hands. And if these memories resonate with your heart, if they remind you of a time when life felt slower, quieter, and somehow more human, don't forget to subscribe for more timeless stories like this, because there are countless moments waiting to be remembered. Maybe that's the real gift of nostalgia. It isn't about escaping the present. It's about reconnecting with the parts of ourselves that time tried to tuck away. It reminds us that simplicity still has value, that connection still matters, that presence still heals. It reminds us that beauty doesn't need to be loud to be felt. Sometimes it lives in the softest moments, the ones we never realized would mean so much years later. Because the truth is, the 1960s weren't just a decade. They were a feeling, warm, textured, alive. They were the glow of streetlights on summer nights, the echo of a baseball game drifting from a living room radio, the smell of crayons in an elementary school classroom, the hush of a neighborhood settling into sleep, the laughter of friends riding bicycles down a quiet American street, the thrill of watching a man walk on the moon for the very first time, the ache of realizing the world was bigger than you imagined, and the comfort of knowing you still belonged somewhere inside it. You carry those moments with you, in your memories, in your stories, in the way you look at the world today. They shaped you quietly, gently, deeply, and even as time moves forward, they remain rooted in who you are, reminders of a world that asked you to feel, to slow down, to understand what mattered. Maybe tonight, when the world quiets just enough, you'll hear echoes of those days, the laughter, the music, the soft rhythm of a simpler time, and maybe, just for a moment, you'll feel yourself drift back to the 1960s, to warm kitchens, to glowing televisions, to long summer evenings, to a version of America that lived not in perfection, but in presence. Because some decades pass, but some decades stay, and the 1960s, they stay forever.